welcome again to the 2018 Nonprofit Salary and Benefits Survey Results Call. I'm Allison Albert, your host, and the Director of Membership and Marketing at Maryland Nonprofits. I'd like to introduce a couple of my coworkers who are on the call today. First is Heather Iliff, Maryland Nonprofits President and CEO. You want to say hi, Heather?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the call today.
Great. And next is Sawita Kamara, who is the survey's author and the expert who will be sharing more information about the results with us today. Sawita is Maryland Nonprofits Project Manager and Research Consultant. And Sawita, go ahead and say hello to the group.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Allison.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive in, shall we? Sawita, we know that the nonprofit sector employs 10% of Maryland's workers, and the sector's activity makes up about 12% of the GDP in the Maryland, D.C., and Virginia region. So that's pretty significant. Can you tell us how this salary survey helps us understand the resiliency in the nonprofit sector?
Sure. So as a bit of a background, for the past several years, Maryland Nonprofits has been taking a look at key trends in nonprofit revenues and nonprofit service demands, fundraising challenges facing nonprofits, and other areas that impact the resiliency of the nonprofit sector. And how this report ties into this is that using the Salary and Benefits Survey report, we have an opportunity to take a closer look at data that relates to wages paid to nonprofit employees, and in particular, the wages paid to executive leaders and some other key findings around race and gender demographics of CEOs and board chairs that work in nonprofits.
Okay, thank you. Sawita, tell us a little bit about the survey methodology and give us a profile of the respondents. And if you can, please be sure to include some of the interesting findings around employee benefits.
Okay, great. So this year's survey, the 2018 survey, was developed and administered online between February and March of this year. And sections on the survey, for those of you who participated in the survey, thank you so much for participating. But sections on the survey included questions related to organizational size and scope, meaning the fields the subsector of the organization, staffing, compensation, and also benefits. The survey was distributed by email to approximately 9,000 people, and a postcard was also mailed to about 3,000 nonprofit organizations throughout the state. And so a little bit about our profile, our survey respondents. There were 323 who actually accessed this survey. We had a few duplicates. 31 were duplicates, and the way we proceed with duplicates is that the response from the organization that had the most complete entry was what was included in the data analysis. We had 274 organizations who actually entered specific salary data on their employees, and a total of 243 respondents completed the entire survey. When it comes to the profile, again, of where our survey respondents came from, 53% of organizations in the survey were located in Central Maryland, and 23% from the suburban Washington region. We also had 12% of participants from the Eastern Shore, 7% from Western Maryland, and 6% from Southern Maryland. Majority of the respondent organizations had gross revenues of less than $1 million. About 60% had gross revenues of less than $1 million. And over 25%, 27% actually, had gross revenues between $1 million to $4.9 million. And then 13% had budgets over $5 million. And our organizations worked in a range of fields. But it trends along with the number of nonprofits, the subsectors that are found in the state, where over one-third worked in human services, followed by 18% provided services in education. Then we had 17% who focused in public and societal benefits, and then 11% were arts, culture, and humanities organizations. And to your question, Allison, some of our interesting benefit findings about our profile is 76% of nonprofits reported that they provided salary increases or raises to their employees in the past 2 years, and over 2/3 of our nonprofits provide health insurance for their employees, and about 50% of them also provide health insurance to family members of their employees. So, another interesting finding in terms of benefits is that a majority of our nonprofits, 60%, actually offers some type of retirement plan for their employees. And specifically, 44% of those who do offer a retirement plan, they offer a plan that includes an employer contribution. And then lastly, another key benefit finding is that 75% of our nonprofits participating in the survey provide paid vacation leave, or about the same amount provide paid sick leave. And then about 1/3 provide personal leave, and almost half provided some type of paid time off, which includes combined sick, vacation, and personal leave. And the median paid time off cited by organizations in the survey is about 10 days per year of paid time off.
Great. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's talk about the report's most striking findings. Can you tell us what the data says about executive compensation, especially as it relates to gender, race, and ethnicity?
Sure. In terms of executive pay, just starting at that overall level, the average median salary for chief executives, that's CEOs, executive directors in Maryland, was $85,000. 86% of CEO salaries are $75,000 and higher. So when we were looking at the distribution, we had 86% of our CEOs had salaries of $75,000 or higher. 14% of them had salaries that were less than $50,000. In terms of gender demographics, we found that a majority of nonprofit organizations, and this then trends with national data, majority of nonprofit organizations are led by a female CEO. So 67% of nonprofit leaders are women and 31% are men. But however, when we look at that, gender disparities do persist within the sector in terms of executive pay, with median salaries paid to female CEOs ranking 14% lower than their male counterparts. So for female CEOs, their median salaries was $86,000, and for their male counterparts, their salaries was $96,000. In terms of some interesting demographics around race and ethnicity, only 19% of CEOs in the sector were identified as African American, Latinx, Asian, or another race or ethnicity. And what we also saw was interesting, the likelihood of having a CEO who is a person of color decreases as an organization's revenue increases. So, for example, 30% of organizations with revenues under $1 million were led by a CEO who was a person of color. However, when you get to revenues of $1 million or more, only 9% of those organizations were led by a CEO who was a person of color. So that's some of the interesting findings around executive pay. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. You also uncovered some interesting findings around compensation as it related to board leadership. Can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Sure. I'll start with actually talking about some of the interesting findings we had about just board leadership overall. 70% of nonprofits identified that their board chair or president was white, and we also saw, similar to what we saw with interesting gender demographics around the executives, that we also saw the likelihood of having a male board chair president increase with organization revenue. And then when it comes to actually the compensation that is paid to the CEOs or executive directors, what was most profound is that salaries paid to CEOs, regardless of gender, were highest among organizations with a board chair or president that was identified as white and male. When you looked across, regardless of gender, if the board chair or president was identified as white and male, the salaries paid to those CEOs, those executive directors, was higher.
Very interesting. Okay. So let's pivot to some discussion with our callers. So Heather, are you still there?
Yes, I am, and thank you so much. Really, it's a Q&A session has started, so we're experimenting with the conference call line here. So we will be opening your lines as you queue yourself up to ask a question. So what you want to do is press *6 if you want to either ask a question or make a comment. And I, as a woman working in the sector, I certainly my eyes were opened to this idea that male board chairs are more highly correlated to higher salaries, whether it's a woman or a man in the position. And so I'm thinking very carefully about the role that we women play in leadership roles in supporting equitable salaries for other women. And I'm wondering if any of you would like to chime in on any other thoughts that you have about what you might see in your own experience, or any thoughts that you think are the implications of a gender pay disparity among nonprofits. And also just want to open it up for any questions that you have for Sawida. So do we have anyone lined up? Okay, so what you need to do is press *6 if you would like to chime in or answer a question or ask a question. Don't be shy. Come on now. We have 34 people on the call. I'm sure someone would like to say something. Okay, so it looks like Peter Fang, we're unmuting you if you want to go ahead.
Hi, Peter Fang is Ana Astrid Molina. Hi.
Oh, hi, Ana Astrid.
I didn't know my husband's name is going to appear. What I wanted to say, because I have worked with smaller ethnic minority organizations, and the CEO tends not to actually get their salary because they are so, well, the board is usually very small, and the board does not have a strong position, and so the CEO tends to say, "Don't pay me. I will try to volunteer as much as I can, as long as we put all the money into the program." And they are usually females.
Yes, that's definitely a trend we often see in small organizations, and it doesn't always lead to growth, but sometimes it does. And I know we had to even scrub out some of the data where people put in executive director salaries as if they were full-time, but they were less than the minimum wage. Sawida, would you like to comment on what you were seeing related to small organizations? And you need to unmute, I think, *6. Oh, there we go. Jabari's unmuting you.
Yeah. Specifically around executive pay or just small organizations overall?
Either, yeah.
Okay. Well, as discussed, when you're dealing with smaller nonprofits, those with a smaller revenue size, they were more likely to be led by CEOs who are women and people of color. So that was one thing, that an area that emerged from the findings. And then also, as discussed before, as the revenue increases with an organization, then you saw that there was less representation in terms of gender and also race and ethnicity. So when we're talking about small nonprofits, we're specifically talking about nonprofits that tend to be more led by, overall, led by women and also people of color, who are also, we did see some receive that pay disparities persisted when you looked across gender lines and also at race and ethnicity. However, when it comes to the numbers, when you look through the report, you'll see that there were not a lot of salaries reported for people who by race and ethnicity at the CEO level. So there is just overall a representation issue. So that's why you don't see a lot of our key findings focusing on race and ethnicity and in terms of the pay equity, because there's actually an underlying, representation equity issue going on there.
Mm-hmm. So you're saying that even though it's more likely that a woman or a person of color is leading an organization, a smaller organization, there's still a majority of white leaders of small organizations, and the number of people of color was smaller?
Yes, smaller, so that therefore we can't really assess if there's a significant difference between the salary paid to a CEO who's a person of color leading a small organization or a CEO who is white, because there's not enough numbers even in that realm.
Mm-hmm. So next year we have to work even harder to get those organizations to participate in the salary survey, right?
Yes, exactly.
Good. Okay, so we want to keep the lines open for other questions or comments. So please press *6 if you would like to talk. We have a caller whose number ends in 6700. If you'd like to chime in. You should be unmuted now if your phone number is 759-6700.
Oh, great, thanks. This is Sue from White Angle Youth Media, and my question is around what you guys found about part-time employee salaries and what kind of wages and hourly wages people are getting there.
Sorry, Sawida, you're still muted. We're going to need to unmute you.
Yes, I was waiting. So the survey only focuses on full-time equivalent salaries. So organizations that had part-time employees had to convert those salaries to full-time and then place those salaries. So we're not looking at part-time employees per se. We're looking at the full-time equivalent salaries.
Okay, thank you. And our next question is coming from phone number that ends in 1736, 428-1736. Go ahead.
Yes, hi. This is Diane DeFries from the American College Dance Association. I have a follow-up from the previous question and then another question. One is whether you could give us a sense, even full-time, of administrative assistants and sort of that level. And my original question was whether you break down in terms of salary in terms of the regions. So I'm particularly interested in the suburban D.C. area, but whether you broke it out that way.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. In terms of the first question, I believe, well, I'll take the second question first, which is salary by region. We only break down salary by region at the executive level and not for every participant. And in terms, and then in terms of administrative, we have a lot of different categories in the actual salary survey report. So I didn't want to necessarily go into details about specific pay, because it's not just like one range. It's a multiple range. So if it's something, I'll be definitely glad to provide you that information directly by email, because there's administrative assistants, there's executive assistants, there's just different categories, and I want to make sure I'm giving you the correct information.
And is all that in the full report?
Yes, all of that is in the full report, yes.
Okay, great. I can find it there then. Thank you.
And how many positions are covered in total in the survey?
Let's see, how many?
I think it's 34, if memory serves.
Okay. So yeah, it is pretty comprehensive in the kinds of positions that nonprofits tend to have. Okay, so our next caller is going to be from the, looks like Greater Baltimore Committee, 2300200.
Hi, it's Jeannie Howe from the Greater Baltimore Culture Alliance.
Oh, great. Hi,
I just wondered about how much historic data we might have. Just sort of anecdotally in my experience in Baltimore from '89 to now, in the early years that I was here working for smaller nonprofit organizations, most of the female leaders were married to people who had professional careers that were very high paying. And so they did not put a premium on supporting salaries for themselves, nor were they supportive particularly of the salary opportunities increasing for the women who worked for them. So it's a little bit of a statement, but just wondered if there's any sort of look back, or whether, as I said, just anecdotally, I'm sure it wasn't all like that, but that was my experience.
That's a good point. We've only been asking gender and race equity questions for a couple of years, but Sawida, do you have any insights on that?
Unfortunately, I don't. In terms of Maryland nonprofits, there are other states, the third sector, New England, for example, and also Heather, you specified the organization in Pennsylvania that they've been studying salaries across with the equity in terms of gender and race lens for longer than we have, and so they may be able to do that. But I know third sector, New England, and also there's a nonprofit organization in Pennsylvania that has been studying that longer than we have. This is our second year asking for gender and race, so we'll need a little longer time to kind of see where the trend goes.
So it's a really good question, Jeannie, and I think it also just highlights the role that we women play in our own gap in pay. So if we don't have a high expectation for pay that is in parity with the men, how can we expect the organizations to be paying us in parity? And I think there is research out in the field that shows that women tend not to negotiate when they get their initial salary offer, whereas men, the majority of men will negotiate, and that negotiation gap is usually around $5,000 at the beginning of your career, which then continues to grow throughout your career as you get different job offers and then make it to that CEO position where you may have a lower expectation for yourself and you may have a board led by a woman. And those two things are ways that women may be ourselves leading to this pay gap.
Sorry, let me mute again. Everything's fine here.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much for that question. So we do have another caller lined up. This is number 987-1048. You are unmuted. Please go ahead.
Hi, my name's Carol Duvall. I'm from the Coordinating Center in Millersville, and I was curious, 13% of the respondents, if I wrote this down right, had budgets over $5 million. How does that compare with the overall membership of Maryland nonprofits?
Maybe we could answer that as it compares to the overall sector. The nonprofit sector, I'm not sure, Sawida, if you have that handy, but generally there is a small number of larger organizations and a large number of smaller organizations. Do you have any of that nonprofits by the numbers data handy, Sawida?
Unfortunately, I don't. I'm looking it up now, though.
Okay.
This is Allison. I was just looking at that this morning, and it was, I believe, 66% of nonprofit organizations are under $1 million in revenue.
Under 25,000 in revenue is
sorry.
Much smaller than that. Yeah. So nonprofits tend to skew small. Our membership is a little bit larger than the broader nonprofit sector that is about 65% under 25,000. Generally those all volunteer organizations. But if you go to MarylandNonprofits.org, and click under, let me see here, under
Nonprofit resources,
and then nonprofit research, you can pull that information up about the broader sector in general. And I'm going to, at this time, turn it back over to Allison to wrap us up.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. That's okay. Thank you all for the great questions and the discussion. I wish we had more time. We do have just a few minutes left, and I want to ask Sawita and Heather also a final question about how organizations can use this compensation data, and then Heather, if you'll just chime in and let them know how Maryland Nonprofits is using the data.
Okay. Yes. Well, one of the things when kind of looking at other compensation studies, I just always like to remind people that it's important to share that this compensation data is a snapshot of what nonprofit pay currently is and not necessarily what it should be. When interpreting this data and any other market data that you access out there, it is critical for nonprofits to remember that the median wages for many roles may be inadequate. And, we're forcing some of our nonprofit employees to perhaps have to work second jobs or make sacrifices in their standard of living. So when reviewing compensation data, I always want to encourage organizations to consider not only the market, but their own mission, their values, and as well as the equity concerns that have been presented in today's discussion.
Thank you, Sawita. And I'll just add here that Maryland Nonprofits is using this data, but we benchmark all of our salaries every 2 years for our board of directors, and the Standards for Excellence call for the board to regularly review the salary structure of an organization. Now, the CEO clearly has responsibility to set individual salaries within the organization. So the standards does not suggest that the board take that over, but that the board is aware of your overall salary structure by position, and that the board can set a policy, a compensation philosophy. And so where the board really discusses, do you have a policy of paying a living wage, for example, for all positions? Do you aim to be at the midline point, or do you aim to be more highly competitive in your salaries? Or do you have certain kinds of positions that would necessitate being on certain levels of, say, you 50 percentile, 75th percentile, or 90th percentile? And so those kinds of philosophical questions about your salary structure can be put together into a policy by your board, and we have samples of that in the member area. So if you type into the search bar after you log in the member portal, sample compensation philosophy, you will see those come up. And then finally, just to frame that conversation that the board will have, they want to look at, and the Standards for Excellence call for the board looking at two key things. One is what is your overall positioning of the organization salary-wise as it compares to the market? And again, you decide where you want to be in that market. And secondly, what is your internal equity of positions? So you want to look at the difference between the top paid employee and the lowest paid employee, and also look at your own gender and racial demographics at different salaries to make sure that you are not perpetuating any discrimination in your organization. So those are some resources that are at your fingertips, and we welcome you to come into the member portal and make comments and suggestions if there's anything that you would like Maryland Nonprofits to further do that would be helpful resources for you on this salary and benefits survey. And I would like to just extend my thanks and kudos to Sawita Kamara, who was the lead researcher on this project, and also to Allison Albert, who is your resource on all things membership and benefits at Maryland Nonprofits. Thank you, everyone, and I hope you have an excellent day.
Great, Heather, thank you. I just want to add, this is Allison, a couple last thoughts. Members, please let us know if you need help logging into the portal to access the survey results and the other resources that Heather was talking about. And for those of you who are not yet members, I will be sending a follow-up email that includes the salary survey executive summary. And we'd love for you, to take a look at that and also and consider joining Maryland Nonprofits and accessing the full survey and all of the other amazing benefits that we have in the member portal, and also, for access to our staff experts. And I'm happy to talk to you about that in more detail, and you'll have my contact information from the follow-up email. So we will also be posting this recording online, and we'll notify you when it is ready. Thank you so much, everyone, for your participation. This was really wonderful, and I hope you have a great afternoon.